Joining me now, California Congressman Robert Garcia, member of the House Homeland Security and Oversight Committees and a good friend to us. So welcome back to the show. I'm curious your thoughts on Georgia being Harris's first stop after the DNC. And Democrats, are they confident they can win that state again this year?
The campaign is doing everything it can to ensure that we win all of these swing states, and Georgia is a really important piece of the map. This last, obviously, week at the convention, delegates were fired up from across the country, and I spoke to a lot of delegates and volunteers and leaders from Georgia. They are organizing and working every single day. They believe they are building the single best operation that's ever been for a presidential campaign on the ground in Georgia right now. And if you look at that map and where the polls are going, we are definitely solidifying our support in places like Wisconsin, like Michigan. And what does that mean for Democrats? That means we've got to pick up Pennsylvania or Georgia or North Carolina, or hopefully all three, to win the White House. And so Georgia's critical for us. It's absolutely the right place for the vice president and the governor to come to right after the convention. But I got to tell you, we're going to compete everywhere. We're going to compete in every single one of these states. And our plan is to win, and to win big in November.
So let's talk about the DNC. You were there. You addressed the Democratic faithful on night one. What was the energy like in the United Center? And what's the prevailing sentiment now that it's over?
I mean, having been to prior conventions in the past, the energy was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And it just didn't last on that first day. It was every single night, of course, leading to Vice President Kamala Harris's speech. And what you heard over and over again from delegates is that they were fired up. They had not been this excited, many of them, their whole political lives. And the other thing that was really interesting is you saw people that were also being engaged for the first time, volunteers that had just shown up to help because they'd never been involved in a campaign and they wanted to get involved. And that's being replicated, not just, of course, at the convention, but look at the grassroots fundraising. She's smashing records. The tens of thousands of new volunteers, it's smashing records. The amount of people that are trying to work for the campaign. And so that energy it is truly magic. And it doesn't just happen. It's because you have a candidate that people are inspired by and a team that was ready to meet the moment of this candidacy. So the week was fantastic, but there's a lot of work to do. And I've told folks, and I told people at the convention, yes, we're definitely beginning to lead a bit in some of these states and some of these polls, but we have to win. And that should not stop us in any way of working hard every single day.
You know, speaking of the candidate, before the vice president took the stage on the final night, you said the country's about to get to know the Kamala Harris we know in California. You're the former co-chair for Harris's 2020 campaign. Explain who that is, and do you think Americans got to know that Kamala Harris?
I really think that millions of Americans got introduced to Kamala Harris in a way that us Californians and those that have known her for a long time truly know her. I think what folks saw on that stage was someone that is tough, that is a prosecutor, that has spent her entire career representing one client, and that is the people. She talked about her experience as a prosecutor, about how she will take that case to Donald Trump, about how she is tough and has always taken on sexual predators, the big banks, the cartels. That's a story that we heard and that people saw, many people, for the first time. We also got to see the Kamala Harris that is compassionate, that is all about supporting people, especially those that need our more support. And I think also people got to know her family and her family values, how critical her own family is to her, but also her mother, her middle-class upbringing, what they taught her and the kind of values that they taught her about always fighting for the people in the community. So we're in California, of course, we know her, we're excited and fired up. And it's great to see the country just getting to know the person that we respect so much. And finally, I'll say, if it's one thing that came across also very clear, is that we have a brilliant person at the head of this ticket that is going to take that experience and that knowledge and defeat Donald Trump in November.
Speaking of him, you've been an outspoken critic of Donald Trump. And during the DNC, we saw some prominent Democrats. We had both Obamas and Clintons. President Biden, the candidate herself, who've typically been less direct in their comments, but they went directly on offense when talking about Donald Trump. What caused the change in tenor, and are Democrats united in this approach?
I think we are united. I mean, look, we're in a different phase of this campaign right now. We have to make the case against Donald Trump and why he is a danger to the country. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. He's a criminal. He is a con man. In my opinion, and many others, he's the worst person to ever be president of the United States. And his Project 2025 takes our country backwards in ways that are scary and dangerous, moving abortion rights backwards, moving LGBTQ plus rights backwards, eliminating the Department of Education, treating immigrants and people that are working class or poor less than other people in this country. And so we should be crystal clear that this is a choice for people to make. It's a choice between moving forward and a choice between going backwards with Donald Trump. And so that case, I'm really glad to have heard people going after Donald Trump directly. I sure did during my remarks, and will continue to do that throughout this campaign.
And like you, Harris touched on the issue of immigration and border security during her DNC speech. Let's take a listen quickly to some of what she said.
I know we can live up to our proud heritage as a nation of immigrants and reform our broken immigration system. We can create an earned pathway to citizenship and secure our border.
What did you think about this approach to the border? Did it satisfy critics on both sides?
I mean, what the vice president said was exactly right. As someone myself was earned citizenship, I was given the opportunity to earn citizenship. There's so many immigrants just like myself who just want that opportunity to give back to their country that's given so much to them. And that's what folks that are here that are working hard need to have, is that pathway. And she talked about that. And at the same time, she spoke about the importance of having a secure and a safe and orderly border. Democrats want a secure border. And we also want to make sure that we're treating people humanely, and that for those that are here working hard, doing good work, that there is a pathway to citizenship that is earned over time. And so I think she really has the right balance in place. She's been able, I think, to speak to issues that are complex, that a lot of folks have different perspectives on in this country, and make them and present them in a way that is simple and we can understand. Unlike Donald Trump, of course, who immediately just goes to attacking people and demonizing immigrants and demonizing people in this country. She wants to take a smart approach, which, by the way, is the approach she took when she was attorney general and a prosecutor, which is one that I think a lot of people are going to react to very positively.
Yeah. Lastly here, crime, because it is a major talking point for Donald Trump, who's been asserting that there's a crime wave, even though crime has dropped since he left office. Why does he continue pushing this provably false narrative? Does he think no one's going to check the numbers and say, no, you're not right?
Well, it's because Donald Trump is a liar. He's the biggest liar to ever be president of the United States. And I've been in Congress for about a year and a half, a freshman member. I was mayor of my city for 8 years before that. I worked with our 600 plus police officers, proud law enforcement, worked hard to keep our community safe. This idea that somehow crime is somehow skyrocketed at this moment is false. And mayors and police chiefs across the country will tell you that crime has actually decreased, and it's been decreasing over these last few years since we had a spike during the pandemic, which of course impacted everything. And crime over the last few decades is actually been going down overall. And this is true especially in these last few years. And so the facts are the facts. Police departments across the country have released their crime data, and they do so every single year. Crime has decreased under Biden-Harris administration when it was higher during the Donald Trump administration. And so, look, we still have to keep communities safe. We still have to work with law enforcement and community groups on the ground. Doesn't mean everyone feels safe all the time. There's a lot of work to do, but crime is actually lower, and Donald Trump continues to lie.
Okay, those are points to end on. California Congressman Robert Garcia, good to see you. Thank you.